Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another editing walkthrough. Today's focus will be a composite where we will take 3D elements and stock photos, blending it in Photoshop, taking our original image shot on location all the way to our finished piece. So stay tuned and let's get creative. Whenever I'm working on a composite piece, I always follow 6 basic steps that take me from start to finish. Step 1. The SketchUp phase. Step 2, bringing in your stock images into Photoshop. Step 3, adjusting levels and colors. Step 4, special effects, my favorite part. Step 5, atmospherics. And step 6, the final step, color toning. Following through these 6 steps is more of a guideline rather than rules, but it will help ensure that you have a smooth process from start to finish and yield consistent results from piece to piece. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about my camera settings and lighting information. My camera was set to ISO 1000, aperture 2.8, and a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. Lighting was bare bulb, no flash modifiers, full power with a half CTO gel pointed directly at my subject. And the main goal of that is to just kind of give off a nice sunset glow. Because I shot this on a location that was pretty much covered in shade entirely and the sun had already started to dip behind the buildings in the background, I had to kind of replicate my own sun. So that is the purpose of this lonely little speed light right here. So step 1. The SketchUp/ideas phase. In my opinion, one of the most overlooked but also one of the most crucial aspects of creating a composite image. We want to avoid a cluttered image. We want everything to read nicely. We want to have a clean and strong silhouette. And so that's where this step comes into play. After cutting out your subject from the background, what I like to do personally is throw a black and white adjustment layer. This is to allow me to focus specifically on values and not get distracted with any colors inside of my image. Alright, so once you are done with your SketchUp phase and you're pretty happy with how your composition looks and everything's kind of looking good in frame, you're going to move on to the next step, which is step 2, bringing in your stock images. One of my favorite websites to use is pixabay.com. What makes this website awesome is that it is completely free to use even for commercial work. So something to keep in mind when you're searching for stock photos for your image is the direction of light. So in this case, in my original image, the main source of directional lighting is coming from camera right, and it's this orange speed light right here. This means that when you're looking up stock photos for your image, you want to make sure that whatever you pick relatively matches as close as possible to that directional lighting in your original image. The next factor you want to make sure it matches is the camera angle. Now, are you shooting something on a telephoto lens? You probably don't want to have a background that's shot on a wide angle lens, and vice versa. Now you can kind of get away with faking the camera angle a little bit in post-production, but definitely the most important factor is matching up the lighting. If the lighting does not match, it's going to look wrong, and you just can't get around that. I have here already a couple photos that I've picked out for my image that I think will fit pretty well. So like I said before, some key things you want to make sure of is that the direction of lighting matches your image. Now you can see this stock photo, the sun is coming from the left, though in my original image the sun, or in this case my speed light, is coming from the right. So a simple fix is, of course, to flip the image around. And you'll see right off the bat it already is starting to look much better. Okay, so once you're done placing all of your elements into your composite, the next step is step 3, and that is levels and colors. Now before we get started editing these levels, I'm going to give you an example of what we're trying to achieve in the first place. So here is a landscape image that I've converted to black and white, and here's what becomes very obvious. Objects that are close to the camera have a much darker black point than the objects that are farther away from the camera. And this is because of atmosphere. The farther away an object is from the camera, the more atmosphere there is between that object and the camera, and because of that, the object appears lighter. This effect is very powerful in telling the viewers how far away something is from the camera. Now you notice in this composite, we're missing that effect. All these floating pyramids right here, the sky, and these background mountains and hills all need to appear as if they're farther away from the camera. So let's go ahead and start with the farthest away element, and that would be this pyramid. With that layer selected, create a levels adjustment layer, right click that adjustment layer and create clipping mask. This makes it so this adjustment only affects that layer. And so to bring up the black point, simply click on this slider and drag it up. Once you've done that, go ahead and repeat this process for every other element, making sure that the objects that are farthest away from the camera have the lightest black point and getting darker as it becomes closer to the camera. So now that we have finished adjusting all the levels as needed, things are starting to look a little bit more cohesive. Let's do a little before and after to kind of get an idea of how big of a change we made. So this is before any levels adjustments, and this is after. Again, this is before, and this is after. And you're noticing a huge difference. Things that are far away from the camera look farther away. Things that are nearer to the camera look closer. The next part of this step is to adjust colors. When I turn off this black and white adjustment layer, you're going to notice a very large discord between all the different colors in the image. You'll see here one of the biggest differences is this chunk of landscape is much different in color than the rest of the image. So to make these changes in color, we're going to use an adjustment layer just like we did with the levels. The benefit of this is everything is non-destructive, meaning we can change anything if we need to. So when it comes to adjusting colors, I like to start with the largest items first. So let's go ahead and add a color balance adjustment layer. You can use any other adjustment layer that you would like or any other method that you would like. This is just what I like to use. Use what works best for you. Go ahead and create a clipping mask. Get in the habit of naming all of your layers, as this is going to save you a headache down the road. So we can see from this image that the landscape is a little bit too blue, so simply adjust the yellow slider a little bit over to the left. Alright, and that's looking pretty good. Now we're going to continue on with adjusting the color balance of everything else. Alright, so we are now finished with all the color adjustments. Let's go ahead and look a little before and after to kind of give ourselves an idea of what kind of change we have made. So, before and after. Before and after. And you're noticing right away everything's kind of starting to come together. It's the small changes that add up one after another that make the largest changes in the end. One important step I forgot to mention earlier in the video is dodge and burn. This step is important in adding a bit more depth to your image by selectively enhancing shadows and highlights. Now there are a bunch of different ways to dodge and burn, so pick whatever method that you like best. Okay, so now at this point we are at about 70% of the way finished, and that brings us to the next step. Step 4, special effects. Now with special effects, it could be anything that you want for your image, laser beams, lightning, explosions, fire, magic, anything of that sort. For this specific image, I am just wanting to add a little bit of green particle effects coming off the subject staff. To do this, I'm going to add a new layer on top of my subject. Go ahead to your brushes, and I'm going to select one of my custom particle brushes. When it comes to particle brushes, there's a million of them all over the internet. Just kind of search around and find out what works best for you, or which ones you like the most. Now, because this image is fairly conservative, I don't want to go too overboard with the special effects that take away from the rest of the image. Now that I've painted on my particle effects, I'm going to double click my layer to bring up the layer style panel. In here, we're going to add an outer glow. Go ahead and make this linear dodge. Make the glow green. And the two main sliders we're going to mess around with is size and range. There's no correct settings for this, but you can go ahead and use my settings as a starting point, but go ahead and adjust it as needed. Now I like the way these look, so now that I'm liking the way this looks, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of motion blur to kind of give the illusion that it's flying through the wind. If you want the effect to be a little bit stronger, go ahead and just duplicate that layer. Now I'm going to group both of these special effects layers. I'm going to add a layer mask, painting black on that layer mask. I'm going to go ahead and erase away parts of this image that I don't want to show those particle effects. So after we have done the special effects, the next step is step 5, and that is atmospherics. Now atmospherics are things such as lens flares, blooms, or dust particles. I might add a little bit more of a glow coming from these green particles. With a large soft round brush, flow way down and set that to screen or lighten. And all I'm doing is just slightly enhancing the glow. When painting in atmospherics, I like to start off strong and then dial back the adjustment, maybe down to 85% or so, just so the effect isn't as obvious. Another very obvious atmospheric that we are missing from this image is that from the sun. The sun is a very powerful light source, and so even though we're not facing the sun directly, we would get a little bit of glow coming from the camera right side of our image. So go ahead and just select a color that is similar to that of the sunlight, just kind of paint in from the side. Now the final step in this composite process, or this image making process, is color toning. In this step I also like to do sharpening and any other kind of final effects on top of my image. So for example, I might add a little bit of edge glow around things that are bright in the image. Alright, and so now you are finished with your image, and that is essentially my process from start to finish. So let's go ahead and do a little recap right here. So here's our starting image. This is our SketchUp phase. And our final image. Again, original image, SketchUp phase, and the final image. Now, if you guys have any questions about any techniques that I used in this video, go ahead and leave me a comment down below and I'll try and explain in greater detail what I did. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Stay creative.